Welcome to our post-Thanksgiving episode of Sunday Night Discussions. We're tryptophaned up and shopped out, and we're back to share with you. We're so glad that you've joined us tonight. Hopefully you've got the DVR set to record the finale of The Walking Dead so you can watch us alive tonight. Tonight we are sitting down with Rick Rusaw. He's a senior pastor at Life Bridge Christian Church in Longmont, Colorado. Along with leading a church, Rick is the co-author of Living a Life on Loan, Finding Grace at the Intersections. We'll be discussing finding your purpose in God and living it out, plus other topics, like maybe, I don't know, the Denver Broncos or stuff like that. As always, you're hosted by the ever humble and meek Steve Hinton in Houston, Texas. I am your co-host, Robert Tippett, here in the cold and wet Austin, Texas. Good evening, Steve, and welcome back to our show.
Robert, thank you. I think the word weak is a little bit better descriptive of me today.
You're not feeling well.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I can't remember the last time I took a Sunday off of Thanksgiving. I guess I kind of felt like most senior pastors, lead preacher pastors or whatever, they purposely take that Sunday off and let someone else preach. And I did that this week. I drove up to Dallas to see my brother, and somewhere between the trek from Dallas back down to Houston today, I caught the mother of all colds. And, if I were living back in Russia back in the day, I'd be drinking, instead of my hot tea tonight, I'd be having some hot vodka and honey. We're not doing that tonight, but yeah, it was a good Thanksgiving break. What about you guys?
Yeah, it was good. I had all the kids home, and we went and sat in the wet, windy rain at Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium and watched Texas Tech take out the Longhorns once and for all. Probably ended their bowl hopes for this season, the way that ended up. So, yeah, it was a good time.
Well, this was the first time that we were without both of my boys. My oldest is at Ozark Christian College right now. My second is almost halfway through Marine boot camp. And we did get a letter. We got another letter from David in San Diego. And one little funny caveat of his letter to us, he said, I understand now why back in Vietnam when they had the draft, that they only drafted you for the Army. They didn't draft you for the Marine Corps because, and this is Eric, or my brother, my son's words, that apparently in the Marine Corps, the drill instructors are allowed to do things to recruits that apparently aren't legal. So David was kind of like, okay, I get it now. You have to volunteer for this. They can't make you.
They're really just a branch of the Navy anyway. So not even a true branch.
But we're here. We haven't done a poll in a long time, Robert, but I'm wondering, when Christmas gets here, are you going to do a real tree or a fake tree?
I always do a fake tree, and the fake tree is up. I put the star on the tree today. We got the tree out yesterday. Girls set it up, and I put the star on it today. So we're all set on that front, mostly because I'm leaving town. I'm traveling this next week, so I needed to get all that done before I left town.
We've been doing a real tree for the past few years, and usually our tradition has been Friday after Thanksgiving or sometime that weekend, but since we were traveling, we weren't doing that. We will probably get the tree up, buy a tree sometime this next week, and I'm excited for that. I like Christmas. And this is our Thanksgiving and Christmas episode. We're finishing it up tonight for the season. Those of you who are, going to watch the playback later on, this is it. And I'm excited for our guest on tonight. Actually, we probably ought to get our checkbooks out and write him a check because he made a huge sacrifice to be with us tonight. Apparently, he had tickets for the Broncos-Patriots game and said, no, I'm going to be with Robert and Steve on Sunday Night Discussions. So
no better place, right? I guess to be here. But I'm open for the check. So
you're open for the check.
Yeah. That's spelled RUSAW if you're looking for it.
Well, Rick, welcome to the world. And before you tell us who you are, you got to answer the poll. Do you do the live tree or the fake tree?
I live in Colorado, so your only choice really is fake because the needles fall off in about 24 hours. So dry here. So,
because it's
first tree,
yeah.
When we moved here, we bought a live one at night, got it home, and found out they'd spray painted the sucker green. So,
wow. Yeah, no, for me, it's just the lights. I'm just too lazy to put the lights on every year, so I bought a lit tree.
100%.
Rick, welcome to the show. You're up there in cold country. Tell us about who you are.
Yeah, I'm been at LifeBridge for 24 years. Kind of really interesting story how we ended up here, but God's been kind and gracious. And Longmont's a little north of Denver, near Boulder. Kind of like this area. Not only is it like got all the great stuff, outdoor stuff, all that kind of thing, but it got voted last year. The county we live in is the least religious county in America, and so if I'm gonna
Wow.
have to work somewhere, I'd rather work there, I guess.
Wow,
Okay.
okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, we got all kinds of spiritual stuff here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, if you want to stare at your navel or hum and chant, chase fairies through the woods, there you got all that you want here. So, Boulder is 20 square miles surrounded by reality.
I like
I
it.
like that. I like that. Well, before we get too serious, I just thought of this question. Are people up there still talking about Tim Tebow, or do they care anymore?
They did. Not so much now. It was a huge thing. He's such a competitor and won a few games. Everybody was excited about that. But yeah, not so much today anymore. We got Peyton. If we hadn't gotten Peyton, they might still be talking about Tebow.
Sure.
So.
Okay. Well, okay, let's do this to kind of dive into things. Here we are, Sunday night discussions. We're going to be talking about life on loan. We're going to be talking about God's purpose for our life, and we've introduced you as pastor of this great church in, I don't know if you're northern Colorado, but a little bit north of Denver. So people think, okay, here's this God guy, this religious guy, preaches at a church, writes books, that sort of thing. But that hasn't always been the story of your life, has it?
No, no. I grew up in upstate New York. We were, I think my folks, I would describe them as we were kind of a moral home, but really no sense of faith. Both my parents had a ton of dysfunction. My mom primarily grew up in foster care homes. Her mom would just head off to a bar and not come home at night, and that went on for kind of all her growing up years. His dad moved 14 times by the time he was in eighth grade. So they got married at 19, they decided they were going to be different than their family, so they moved out of the inner city of Syracuse and into this little neighborhood. And there was a church down on the corner, and that was in the days when pastors would go calling. And I remember that minister would come by our house, knock on the door, and my dad would say, "Shh, everybody quiet." And I thought we were playing some game. Found out we actually were playing a game. So good home, good values, but no interest in faith. And my junior year of high school, a friend of mine invited me to church camp, to a high school retreat. It was one of those retreat weekends at a camp, and it was the very first time I'd heard there was a God and that He loved me. And I'm still a bit of a skeptic, so it took me a long time to kind of get my head wrapped around that and plow down through evidence stuff. And even now, through the years, whenever I go through one of those seasons of wondering, what about this really fits and what doesn't, I always land on that side of faith. There's just too much evidence that we just showed up here accidentally and kind of living out here on our own, and too finely tuned, I think, for us to head that direction. So I became a Christian, thought I was headed off into some media stuff at Syracuse University, and ended up going to a Christian college, not really sure why. And yeah, from there, interestingly enough, I still do a lot of other stuff. I'm involved in some business, kind of a serial entrepreneur. Some guys golf for a hobby, and I start companies for a hobby. So I guess I haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up.
I'm
And
with you there. I am with you there.
Now, I don't know if you know the purpose of our show. Originally, Rick, we started this to ask or to answer, to reply to a lot of those skeptical questions out there, the questions of millennials and things like that. So, as you were in this journey, what were some of the questions that you had? I mean,
well,
you got this friend takes you to camp.
yeah.
What do you ask?
Yeah, I think for me early on the big questions were really around, is there even a God out there? I mean, aren't we're just here. We just showed up, and kind of Northeast, which was post-Christian before the rest of America became post-Christian, I suppose. That was really kind of my framework, and so there really was a lot of questions about One, is there a God there? And I kind of finally landed on, well, all right, we didn't get here by accident. Too much design, all the design conversations that people have.
Sure.
But then it went further. So what does this have to do with me personally, though? It's great that there's someone out there that kind of spun things up, but that's a nice thought. But I suppose you come down to those really big questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? And what happens when we take that last breath? And those are the big rocks, and still the big rocks that humanity's always wrestled with.
Sure.
So did you come to a place? Again, I'm on a little bit of NyQuil tonight, so my
this could be fun.
Yeah, we're gonna play with Steve.
Robert and I have thought about doing a webcast called Two Drunk Preachers, and I think that's happening tonight. Rick, when did you get to a spot where you said, okay, I'm going to step across the line and do this Christian thing?
Well, I think it came down to, if you're going to be in, be in. If you're going to be out, be out. And honestly, there was just too much telling me that I ought to be in. And so, and I did. And there was a remarkable journey down that path for me of discovering real sense of peace around that. A lot of the stuff gets settled. Jesus gives that great statement in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. Robert, you said you've been preaching through that here some. Yeah. Matthew 6:33, right in the middle of all the stuff we ought to quit worrying about. He says, "Seek first His kingdom, His righteousness." Right. And all the rest of the stuff. The way I want to interpret that, I guess, is the rest of that stuff you've been worrying about kind of settles. And that's what happened for me. All the other things that I didn't have my head wrapped around, didn't have the answers to, those things just kind of settled. Yeah.
Now, how old were you at this point?
I was probably 17, 18, somewhere in there.
And then you went off to a Bible college. Was that Ozark Christian College?
No, I went to Cincinnati.
Okay.
Cincinnati Christian University. So.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. I was there, got hooked on Skyline Chili and La Rosa's Pizza, and started becoming a Reds fan during all that time.
Steve, that's familiar to you, isn't it, personally?
What, Cincinnati?
Yeah.
Well, I was there, but I'm trying to remember. Did you mention that in your book, Rick, that just the whole Bible college picture?
I don't remember if we did in that one or not, so I'm sorry. No recollection on that.
Well, you did co-wrote a book simply titled Living a Life on Loan, and we will give that away later on in the show. But Rick, to kind of get this going, in Chapter 3, either you or Eric have a quote here by Jimmy Carter. And, I read this, I thought, this might be Billy Graham or something like that. But Jimmy Carter said this: "My faith demands, this is not optional. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have to try to make a difference." Wow, that's a little bit more than what we're hearing today in our culture of, my rights. I want this. I want this. Yeah. That's not what Carter was saying, was it?
No, I think really there is, this sense, and what drove the book really was. And probably the reason I'm engaged in church was how do we make a difference as believers? If we're going to be Christ followers, then there ought to be some difference besides people showing up in a church building and we gather together, do the Sunday huddle thing, slap each other on the back, and then go home and wait till next week when we dig it all back out again. How is it we're making a difference? And I think if you look at Carter's life, he probably wasn't that great a president, at least according to everybody who grades presidents. I don't know if we want to get in that debate. I don't think so tonight. But he's been a remarkable person out of the presidency. Yeah. He's been he not only talks about doing stuff, but he actually gets engaged. And I think, right. If you take the Bible and you go through and you underline all the places where God says taking care of others, helping the poor, the disenfranchised. There's that great book, The Hole in the Gospel, where they went through and they underlined all the passages, and then they went with a razor blade and cut them out and said their Bible barely held together, and that would be true. I think God is inviting us, calling us to make a difference somehow, and so that's what drove the book. Really was, all right. It's one thing for us to Ephesians 2:8-9. We love those words. We've been saved by grace, not by works, not by we don't earn it, we don't deserve it. I didn't get to buy a ticket in. I didn't become a good guy, and God says, "Oh, good, now you're there." So we got that grace gift. And most of us don't even pay attention to Ephesians 2:10, which follows right on the heels of those great verses, which is we're God's workmanship, created in Christ to
Right.
do good things that He prepared in advance. So my assumption is that God has some things for us to do, and
Right.
if we just keep our eyes open, we might actually see those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of a sidebar. The title of the book is not inspired by Rush Limbaugh, is it?
No, no, but you're not the first to ask that.
I bet. It's interesting because it's hard, I think, for people to understand who haven't really done the work on that. I haven't read your book, so maybe your book goes into this, but like in my career, I get asked by a lot of people a lot of times, how do I think about my career? How am I planning my career? What's the next step in my career? Blah, all these kind of typical questions you get when you're mentoring people. And the problem I've had with all that stuff is it's not my career.
Right.
This career was given to me, it was handed to me by God, and I'm just doing what He asked me to do. And so some of those things where most people are planning and scheming, I'm not. I'm trying to just pay attention. God, what do you got going on next? And can I get involved in that? How do I jump in?
Yeah, my driver's ed teacher in high school. One, he was a yeller guy. I remember the very first time I was pulling up to a stop sign, and he yelled "stop," and I panicked and hit the gas pedal and just blazed through the intersection.
Yeah.
And he didn't yell at me after that, so there was an upside. But you know, if we pay attention to the intersections, we talk about life on loan. What's your life? It's your loves. It's your passion. So what do you like to do? What do you care about doing? Rather than going out and finding something you hate doing, where's God already given you a lane you like running in?
Right.
And then intersections. Are you paying attention? Because I think God brings some orchestration. I don't think I'm not one of those guys who thinks that the Cheetos I ate for lunch it's because He ordained ahead of time I was going to buy that bag of Cheetos and eat that particular Cheeto
Right,
at that particular
right.
moment. While the Bills were losing today. I don't think that's the case. But I do think in some very sometimes very general, very specific, but some specific ways as well. God has some things planned in advance for us to do, and I wonder how many times I've blazed right through an intersection
Missed it.
and missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The other thing I would say along those lines is that I like to talk about kind of the Jewish philosophy of time. The day started at sundown for them.
Right.
And so they would kind of sleep all night for the first part of the day, and then they would wake up, and there was kind of this assumption that God's been working all night, and I'm just getting up to join Him in His work. And so it's that kind of thing of can I be open-eyed enough spiritually and in my heart that I can see God's work at hand, and then figure out how do I go help Him do that, instead of what can God do to help me make the next touchdown?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we get hung up too, thinking that God had some stuff planned, for you guys, your pastors, you've answered His call, you're doing that thing, and so God has something planned for you, but the rest of us schmucks are just kind of out here slogging it along, and every now and then we find an acorn, and I think it's the opposite of that, actually. I think God has some stuff for all of us to do. My mom loves to do jigsaw puzzles, and when I was a kid, we used to steal some of the pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, just kind of drive her crazy. She would save them up until she had maybe 20, 30, 40 puzzles, and then she'd take them to some nursing home somewhere. I came home one time, there were like 60 puzzles. We were probably in 8th or 9th grade. My friend Mark and I took all those puzzles, dumped them in the hallway.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we belly slid, we skated. It was awesome. And then my friend said, how in the world are we ever going to get these back in the right box?
No.
And I said, who said they have to go back in the right box? We'll just start throwing 50. This one needs 200 pieces. This one needs 1,000 pieces. I think there's some people that bought those at a garage sale 40 years ago still trying to figure out how to get the sucker together. But we'd take that piece of the puzzle, and it would drive my mom nuts that out of 1,000 pieces, one piece, you could tell what the picture was. You could see what it was. You didn't need that piece of the puzzle.
Something's missing.
But for her, the puzzle wasn't complete. And I think that's how God is with us. Sometimes we look at our puzzle piece and we go, man, I don't have much to offer. I'm not that gifted. I don't have a big presence. And yet, I think God looks at it opposite of that. Without us, the picture's not complete. For
So
whatever reason, that's how He's chosen to do that.
how do you advise somebody start to work through that and figure that out?
There's two ways to get in the deep end of the pool. One's off the high dive, and one's to work your way from the shallow end toward the deep end.
Sure.
And my encouragement is get in the water, get
Mm.
in somewhere, and it'll start sorting itself. And when you find that place where you have some, you feel some joy or sense of fulfillment around it, I think that might be the lane God wants you to be running in.
It was a little over a year ago. I had a friend who had mentioned in conversation that they'd lost their purpose. They didn't
Yep.
know what their purpose was anymore. And my advice to them was there are two ways to look at purpose as far as I can tell. There's general purpose, and that is purpose that we all have, that we're all here to do, and we all need to be paying attention to and doing. Love your neighbor,
Yep.
love God, be kind to one another, things like that. And then there's our special purpose, which is the thing that God has specifically made you for, made me for. And my advice to them was, I think when you're working on your general purpose, that's where you discover what your specific purpose is.
Yeah, I would agree. If I go out in the parking lot and get in my car, it's hard to change the direction of a parked car. But you start driving, and you can change the direction of the car. And so
Yeah.
start driving. I suppose the one verse that's made the biggest difference in my life is Proverbs 16:9. It says, "The mind of man plans his ways, and God directs his steps." There have been some times when I've done all the planning and then asked God to endorse my plan. I need you to nudge a few spots in. I want to do this. This is what I got. I got it all set up. You're pretty busy. Got a lot of people, a couple billion people to pay attention to. I've got the plan. Then there have been other times I've sat on a rock and waited for God to send me the postcard with the details. And what I've discovered is I just start driving down the road and I let God use my abilities to think and dream and scheme and strategize, but pray and invite Him to help direct my steps. And
Sure.
It seems when we get those two things going together, I think God ends up being able to use that in a lot better way in our lives.
What I'm hearing, Rick, are some very general statements opposed to, okay, here's a checklist. Do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and, there you are. You've got your life's purpose nailed down.
Yeah. At least for me, and maybe I've not discovered it yet. So, but I don't know if there's some great little tool I can get out, some app I can throw on my phone and have my purpose sorted by midnight tonight. I think it is a combination of what are natural skills you have, things you like doing, you're good at doing, what are learned abilities you have, what are opportunities that are open for us, doors open or not. Mark Twain said, the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. And on that day, when you go, wow, this is, I am made for this. Now, I think where we get stuck, though, is sometimes a door closes, an opportunity closes on us, and we're back going, boy, was I really supposed to do this or not do this? And I heard a great line a while back that God doesn't close one door without opening another door. The problem is He doesn't tell us how long the hallway is, and it's in that hallway sometimes where I get stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could get into a whole conversation about calling and all of that. I don't think we want to get lost in that. But, most of the times I felt like the Lord was calling me to a thing. It was usually to a thing. It was go here, to this. And I had an experience a couple years ago. It was about the third church plant we'd been involved with here in Austin, and a very clear calling from God to walk away. And it was weird to be called to leave and with no clear direction on where to go. I felt kind of like Abraham a little bit when he said, just get up and leave, and I'll take you to a place that you need to go to. Just start going, and it was tough for me to kind of. I said to a guy once, I said, I think the Lord's kind of told me to sit down and shut up for a while, and he goes, well, that's easy, and I went, you obviously don't know me very well.
A couple things come to mind as I'm listening to our conversation tonight. One is the old Protestant work ethic, which kind of came out of Europe. I'm trying to think of the different sects of believers, but it was kind of this idea of we are, number one, we're created in God's image. And then number two, because of that, we have a responsibility to work out our purpose. The other thing is, listening to our conversation tonight, our conversation last week with Tim Harlow, and then the week with that, before that with Bob Roberts, there's kind of a theme that's been going through a number of these discussions, that really ministry is not the job of the select few professionals, but really all of us who wear the name Christ, who have been born again, and that's a Jesus word, that's not a Steve word, that all of us have a role to play in the kingdom. And is that kind of what the direction you're going with this, Rick?
Yeah, I think God's writing a story, and the thread line in his story has been about reconciling man to himself. Ultimately, right. That's the thread line from Genesis to Revelation, woven that through his story. And he's invited us into the story. He's invited us not just into the story, but there's a part of the story he's actually counting on me writing. And it may be big and dramatic, and maybe it's small. Maybe it's helping one at-risk kid, or being an encouragement to somebody in a low spot. I don't know that. I do know that he's prepared some things in advance for us to do. So he's invited us. There's already some stuff that he's planning on me doing, and so my job is to keep my eyes open and my heart open, to pay attention and to look for those opportunities. Robert, you said earlier that there's this kind of general thing we're doing. And one of the things we've been pushing around here for a while, in fact, working on a new book around this, is how do we get better at the two things that Jesus said mattered most? Right. Love God and love your neighbor. Mm-hmm. We get so focused on so many other things, but if I'm trying to love God a little better today than I did yesterday, what's that look like for me? And if I'm loving my neighbor better, my actual neighbor, like the one that lives next door that occasionally drives me crazy, how am I loving them a little better today than I did yesterday? And I think in those paths, there are moments then when I find very specific things to do.
Now, Rick, you said that you've been there in Longmont for 24 years. Can you share with us some stories? And we don't want to break any confidentiality or anything like that, but maybe some stories that you've witnessed over that time period of people who were walking away from God or just kind of neutral, and they met Jesus, and then they began to do their mission, and how that has transformed the lives of others.
Yeah, a lot of great stories. A couple of quick ones. A guy named Jack in our church, he was an assistant school superintendent. He and I met when the mayor in our city put together a task force dealing with a problem we had going on with underage drinking. And the first meeting ended, and he tells me after months afterwards that he went to the mayor and said, "What in the world do you have that pastor on there for?" And whenever we got in a discussion at the table, there were 6 or 7 of us at this table. There's a police chief and social services director and that kind of a table. And Jack and I would always philosophically be on the opposite side of the table. It didn't matter. We just weren't. And it wasn't that we were disagreeable. It's just that we didn't agree. And then I remember after 6 or 7 months, walking out of our meeting one morning, and he said, "Hey, I'm not interested in church. In fact, the only time I've ever been to church is for a funeral or a wedding, and only 2 weddings." He was on his second marriage, and he said, "But my wife is thinking about going to church." And I told her if she was going to go to church, she ought to go to LifeBridge, because they do a lot of stuff in the public schools. And since he was a public school guy, mm-hmm. he wanted to do that. And he started coming with her, and she gave her life to Christ. And he was there the day she was baptized. And then he started showing up. And I remember the day he sat with me across coffee asking, "How do I put my trust in this? How do I do this? How do I make this step?" Well, Jack retires from the school district and actually runs our mentoring program. We provide about 95% of the mentors in the public school. And I remember his statement to me: "My life was good, I was doing fine, and your church has screwed me up." As that was not the path he was headed down, but it's been remarkable to watch what he's doing now.
Yeah, it's funny because when I get people who are questioning me on how do I know when the Holy Spirit's talking to me, it's usually perpendicular to where my train of thought is at the
exactly.
time.
Yeah.
It's usually like a side collision, a T-bone collision with me at the moment.
Yeah. It's kind of when God's big T truth collides with all the little T truths we've been living with. So,
Yeah.
What's another story or two?
there's a guy named Hal in our church. Hal was had a company, sold it to Boeing. Boeing brought him on. He was driving a section of their business, about 6,000 employees working under him. I'd formed a task force here of some CEO types and high profile men and women who'd had some success. And we brought in our mayor and our police chief. We listed all the problems in our community. And there was a common thread that kept showing up, and it had to do with single parents, actually. Single
Mm.
fastest growing household in America, single parents, 92% are single moms. And there's some big deal issues they're facing. So these groups of people went out and figured out, came up with the 5 big issues they're facing, and what could we do to help solve those issues. And we started a little group called the Pearl Group, and Hal walked away from his job, probably somewhere, I'm guessing, $400,000 to $500,000 a year, and now goes around and he's got local businesses hiring single moms. He's talked University of Colorado, Denver University, Front Range to give free tuition to any single mom upgrading her job skills. We provide microfinancing and auto stuff and childcare and mentoring, and I'm watching. And he said, I've never had a better time than what I'm doing now, and we barely make it month to month with the income for the Pearl Group.
Yeah.
So
In the deal.
it's
Yeah.
that thing, that yeah.
Part of my heart, and again, that comes back to the original purpose of Sunday Night Discussions, that we wanted to reach out there to look at questions that millennials have, skeptics have, to say, hey, there really is an answer for that. And one of those questions might be something along the lines of, well, what's the purpose of the church anyway? I mean, all you guys do is show up on Sunday morning and sing a bunch of songs and go home and whatever. And that's not the authentic church. I want to put a shout out, to the church where I'm at, Cypress Crossings. They've already brought in a ton of toys here to the building because they've been doing something for 6-7 years called Share Fair, where they partner with a local elementary school, underprivileged, and they work through the nurse to help identify families who aren't going to be able to resource a lot of gifts for kids on Sunday morning. So we bring all these gifts in, we buy them ourselves, and then we set up a situation that these parents can come, and we give them coupons, and they come in, and we change our auditorium into a Walmart, and they're able to get these gifts. So there are all kinds of churches out there flying under the radar that nobody sees that are doing these sort of things. What about you, Rick? Well, what are some things that LifeBridge are doing to really touch the community around you?
Yeah, we started about 20 years ago. Kind of was driven by a question for me: is if our church disappeared, would anybody care?
Mm.
And we had been growing. We'd gone from a couple hundred to 1,500 or so, and almost all those were new Christians, so it wasn't just swapping sheep. And while I should have been feeling good about that, it came down to what difference are we making. And so we got involved in our public schools. And when we first went out, no one really wanted us. We didn't even know to call the stuff missional, which is the popular word today.
Right.
We called it externally focused. We had no idea what we were doing. We saw this stream going by the front door, and we just decided to get in that stream. And so I remember going to schools and asking if we could help, and the principals and administrators all being nervous and saying, no, not really. And then we went to teachers and coaches and started volunteering. And we got involved with at-risk kids and foster care. And over the years, what's happened is, so today we provide 95% of the mentors in the public school system. If a kid can't read at a third grade level, by the time they get out of third grade, there's a 78% chance they're going to drop out of school. And so we got plugged in doing that. We started doing foster care. We provide half the foster care homes in our county. But that led us to a big issue in foster care, which is a huge U.S. problem. Everyone says we don't have orphans, but the truth is the kids in our foster care, 91% of the prison population has some touch in the foster care system. But kids who are aging out of the foster care system, there's an over an 80% chance that they're going to end up in prison, homeless, addicted, or pregnant, or some combination of those things. And so we started helping with that. We help run that for the state of Colorado. We just launched in Oklahoma. Tennessee, Texas, Illinois, Virginia, Florida are all asking for our church to come and help drive, helping that. We've taken The number of kids who were eligible for adoption, about 2,800, 5-6 years ago, is down under 200 and has remained under 200 for the last 3 years.
Wow.
So I think, it's great for churches to be involved in crisis pregnancy centers. We are as a church, or to do homeless ministry. We try to help with that, or prison ministry, which is great, or recovery stuff. But we said, what if we just got involved further upstream? And that's where we started focusing around at-risk kids, which led to what we do with single parents. And so we just assume that the church ought to be engaged in the real issues going on around us. We just make that basic assumption, and have had a lot of opportunity to do that. Tried to help a lot of churches, actually, not just in the U.S., but in other parts of the world, figure out that same thing. What if we got involved outside our doors? What would that look like?
Wow.
So you're doing international work as well.
Yeah. Malaysia, there's 600 churches in Malaysia that call themselves externally focused. That's in a country where it's illegal to convert to Christianity.
Wow.
Why don't we kind of shift gears, going back to our original purpose, this whole living a life on loan. I don't remember if it's a chapter that you wrote, Rick, or your partner, Eric Swanson, but gave the illustration of a guy named Eric Little, and I love his story.
Yep.
A Scottish guy. Was it the 1920 or 24 Olympics that he ran in?
Yeah, I think it was a 24.
What was the deal where he was talking with his sister and he said, hey, I feel God's passion, or what was that? Can you?
So yeah, he had his very devout family, a lot of faith. He had planned on being a missionary, and ended up on the Olympic team. And there was a whole issue around the event he specialized in. They decided to run on Sunday morning, and so he withdrew from that event, which was big controversy around that. The movie Chariots of Fire is about his story, actually, great story. And so he ran an event that wasn't his, ended up winning the gold medal. But his sister really argued with him. Why don't you just leave, go be the missionary, go do what you want to do? And the best line, I think it's a terrific line. He said, "When I run, I feel God's pleasure." Steve, I think I've caught your cold. We're 1,000 miles apart here. So
I'm glad I could be effective.
Yeah, well, if that means we get out the vodka and honey, then I guess we're all right. So, he said, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And so my encouragement to friends and old, young, Christian, non-Christian is, where do you feel like you're running and God's pleased with you? Where do you find joy in it? We want to make it so hard sometimes. I'm not saying there's not hard things to do. Sometimes I think there's phenomenally hard things to do. You got Robert Livingston in Africa, and they've got that statue of him with his hand looking out over the horizon. And I think what he said was, I've had it up to here with being here. Wasn't that it was easy. Where do you find joy and pleasure? And I think maybe that's the spot God can use you in.
Well, going back to the book, what would be some practical things that you can think of, Rick, that, let's say we got a 21-year-old young lady, 22-year-old guy, and they're in college and they're following Jesus, but they're kind of thinking, this whole deal is about life. And they're thinking, there's got to be more than life than just getting a good job, getting retirement, and there's got to be something more. Where can they begin to find answers to those questions? Well, what would be some recommendations you might give them?
I think one, we are living in a time when, no one's going to have one career anymore. No one's going to have one job. In fact, we're discovering you're going to have multiple jobs in your lifetime. I think the day of us being kind of following in somebody's footsteps and just training in that direction ahead are done. So the downside to that is there's a lot of confusion. All my young friends are really challenged by, what do I do when I get out of college? And
see that, I think, Rick, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask this question, because the world was different 50 years ago than it is today. And I'm not just talking about technology, but the dysfunctional family and the number of young people who are growing up without a dad, who says, this is who you are, this is what you can do. So there are so many young people that are just clueless.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and there's a lot of pressure on to pick something. Um,
Right.
but the truth is that I think it's less than 40% of kids who go to school, college, uh, um, know what they want to do. Of that group that does know what they want to do, um, they change their mind in their first year.
Yeah.
And of the group who ends up doing what they want to do, that they thought they were going to do, it's about 8% when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
So the truth is, we put a lot of pressure on them to know. I would say be a generalist until you find something that clicks for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I've told all my kids that the only reason they need to go get the degree is because it says on a resume, I'm teachable, I can learn, I can be taught. That's it. I don't care what the degree's in. It doesn't matter at a bachelor level what the degree's in. I've got a bachelor's in theology and a minor in music, and I'm in the IT industry and have
Yeah,
been in it
there you
also.
go. Yeah, Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And life tends to do that to us. And so rather than try to focus in, I would encourage, try stuff. What is it that you like doing? What is it that you've been challenged? Take a missions trip somewhere, intern at a company, volunteer to work for free for a month in something. Experiment around until you land in a spot that you feel like, one, you're being stretched, two, that you are doing something that's making a difference in the world. Most of us get so focused on the money side of life. We try to make money do a whole bunch of things that God actually intended to do for us. We
Sure.
want money to give us motivation, security, comfort, joy, identity. Those are all things we ought to find in God. And we try
Right.
to find them in something else. Could be why Jesus said you can't serve God and money both, because and so it's what would I do if I didn't get paid to do this? Now that doesn't mean I shouldn't get paid, but what would I do if I would do this whether you paid me or not?
Right.
What's that thing that maybe you feel? And it's okay to do a bunch of different things. It's okay not to land right out of the chute.
Sure.
Now, you talk in your book about loves and passions, but then intersections as well. What do you mean by intersections? Intersections.
Well, all the time we're crossing through opportunities. So whether that's a conversation that's happening, like this, that maybe someone stumbles onto YouTube, and I'm listening to some things somebody said that might point me in a direction. Maybe it's somebody I meet. Maybe it's some opportunity that comes my way. Are we paying attention? I remember I was speaking at a conference. This will date me. You guys will be familiar. It was before ICOM. It was the missions conference that was being held. It was held in New York City, and I was speaking to the youth session. I was junior in college, senior in college, I guess, and I was speaking for one of the youth sessions. I was standing in line 4 blocks from the conference center at an outdoor food thing, so one of the pizza places in New York City. And the guy behind me said, "Are you going to the missions conference?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "Oh, great, I am too. I'm looking for a guy. Do you know Rick Rusaw?" I said, "Yeah, I do know him." He said, "Well, I'm looking for a associate pastor on our staff down in Fort Myers, Florida. And I was just curious what you knew about him." I said, "Well, he's a good guy and he might be interested in Florida." I was in New York at the time, so Florida sounded good to me. That whole, you never know what's going to happen. That sometimes I think God orchestrates those, and sometimes I think they happen. And when we cross through an intersection, good stuff and bad stuff happens at intersections. So pay attention to the intersections.
Yeah, and the debate about whether God orchestrated or not is really kind of silly. All that matters is that we be faithful in it, and, and
100%.
It's going to work out. No matter, He's going to work it out one way or the other.
I think we get too hung up that God has one place for me to serve, one job for me to do, one person for me to be married to, and so there's 7 billion people on the planet, and God's saying, "Okay, it's out there in the middle of that haystack. Good luck." I think God's invited me to be in His will, to follow Him, to serve Him, to honor Him. And I think God blesses the decisions that happen as a result of that.
Yeah.
A name that's showed up a lot. I don't know if you've seen any of our previous broadcasts, Rick, but a name that has shown up a lot on these webcasts has been Dallas Willard.
Oh,
And
yeah, I love his stuff.
And the way to read his stuff when he talks about finding God's will and things of that nature, he talks a lot about being in this relationship with God. I kind of liken it to a couple that's been married 50, 60 years. A lot of times they don't have to ask each other. They're just so tight with each other, they know. So a lot of it comes back to,
I know. Just the other day, Steve, Diane and I have been married 35 years. I was in the kitchen, had a cup of hot tea, and I was headed toward our family room where there was a college football game on. I said, I think I'm just going to, and before I could even finish what I was thinking, she said, go out and shovel the driveway. How in the world did she know what I was thinking? How did she know that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Exactly. She can finish my thoughts.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be this.
Sorry, you had a really serious point, and I screwed that
Well,
up.
I think this is good because we're talking about what the kingdom of God looks like. What does it look like to be in the kingdom of God? And it's this relationship. I probably ought to go shovel the snow because I love my wife. I want to take care of her. But yeah, the more we're in this relationship, we just kind of know.
I wish, at least for me, my experience, and maybe it's the New Yorker in me or the non-Christian upbringing or whatever. I've never had this like booming, audible cloud writing in the sky. Go do this. I remember praying, God, if I'm going to do ministry, I want to go back to New York. There aren't many churches up there. If I could serve anywhere, I want to serve there. And I ended up being in Fort Myers, Florida, which about, pretty far south in our country. And then I remember saying, well, if I'm going to be in ministry, I want to be a lead pastor guy. I didn't even know what a youth minister was. I thought a youth minister was a guy who preached when he was young. I was pretty green when I went to school. And ended up as an associate pastor down in Fort Myers. And those 5 years there were terrific. I mean, they were great years. Just about the time I was thinking I should stay there. God opened a door back at Cincinnati University when it was going through some real financial crunch, and I was invited to come back as part of a turnaround team on that. And I didn't want to be there. I didn't move there. We commuted for 6 months. I said I was only here a year. And then we ended up at Cincinnati 5 years. And just about time I was saying, man, I don't really ever, want to leave here. I think this is where I should be. I think this is what I'll be doing. I ended up out in Longmont, Colorado, in a really kind of, it had to be a God orchestrated way because I had no interest in the smallest town I've ever lived in, not a really Western guy. Lately I've been praying, Lord, I don't ever want to go to Hawaii. Don't ever send me there. I think it's our heart being open to what he's doing. And I think God opens and closes doors. But when I'm sitting in my driveway waiting for something to happen, nothing happens.
Right. Yeah, you got to be moving.
It's interesting, even looking at my own story.
I've often thought, a comparable illustration is it's easy to take a mule that's moving and get him to steer him where you want him to go. Yeah. It's hard to get a mule to go.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting looking at my own story. The only time, and there's been very few, one of the very few times where I felt like it was a very clear writing on the wall type thing was my second semester at Ozark Christian College. And I remember praying on a particular evening, God, if you've really called me to preach, open up the opportunity. The very next day, I'm in the lunch line before I went out to work, and the secretary for the president came down and said, oh, Steve, by the way, we've got these college students going out on a trip next month, and they need a preacher. Do you want to go? Well, duh.
Yeah.
But, honestly, like I said, those types of things have been very few in my life, and a lot of it's just been trying to walk by faith and allowing God to fill in the gaps when he chooses.
I think sometimes, too, it's not just where do I feel good or feel sense of calling or sense of I'm doing what I should be doing. It's the opposite, too. There's an old line that says if your train's on the wrong track, every station you come to is the wrong station. There have been those moments for me, too, when I realized, man, nothing about this is working for me. I might be actually pushing on the wrong lever at this point.
So how'd you come out of those situations, or one of those situations?
I think for me, it's been because I do some business stuff along the way. It's been a few of those where it seemed right at the time, and then I discovered that really everything I was trying to do in that arena just was not coming together. Kind of in one of those opposite seasons right now. One of the business ventures I'm involved in, the doors God's opening are incredibly remarkable, and it could be because this business is really about developing financial inclusion for the 4.2 billion unbanked people across the globe, and there's been just unbelievable stuff happening with that. So I think it's paying attention to what's happening.
So
I didn't know if we could talk about that or not, Rick, because when I heard this from you the first time a couple of summers ago, we visited up there in Longmont. You were kind of like, Steve, this is hush hush. But if you can, what are you talking about there?
So so we're doing, the mobile phone has opened up a lot of opportunity, and the banking system is fairly predatory, particularly to less financially able, and so kind of through just really some remarkable connections, we've launched a company that is doing banking for financial inclusion. So while we'll do banking for you, there's a lot of mobile phone banking stuff out there right now. Most of those are front-end apps for your current bank.
Right.
And the average person, for example, in the U.S., 21% of people are unbanked, can't get a bank account. Only about 5% of those don't want a bank account. Banks can't make money off of them, so there's no way. The average free checking in the U.S. is $120 a year for average free checking. On average, those unbanked people lose 23% of their paycheck to predatory fees. If I drive down the street of your guys' towns, there'll be one check cashing place after another, one payday loan place after another. MoneyGram, Western Union, all predatory fees. And so we've tried to step into that space. We have our banking license out of Luxembourg. Our offices are out of the UK, and we're in about 42 countries right now. So.
Well, that's interesting. What we have here, world, is a guy by the name of Rick who's seeing a need. I wouldn't have thought about this, but even just people across the globe who don't have enough money to go to, and I like the way Robert says it, the Bank of the Northern Hemisphere,
yep.
and go in and say, here's my check, let's open up an account. A lot of people can't do that, and you're seeing a need, and you're doing something about that need.
Yeah, well, everybody needs a hobby. So some guys golf, and it's really, for me, I feel like both halves of my life have married up around this. There's a real business side to this, and there's a real kingdom side. We're not trying to be a Christian business, but we are trying to be an ethical business that follows biblical principles.
Rick, we had a comment by one of our regular viewers. Number one, he wanted to know if you know who Jack Cottrell is.
Oh, I love Jack.
Yeah. But then secondly, he just kind of making an observation that a lot of times it's the uncomfortable situations that God puts us in.
I don't disagree with that.
Well, we're gonna shut down in a second here, but we've got the book. Living a Life on Loan, and Rick and I had talked a little bit about it earlier, whether or not I'm going to ship it to you or he is. But the first person who chimes in says, I want the book, either through Google+, my blog, Robert's web email address, my email address, Facebook, whoever says, I want the book, we'll get that to you. But real quick, Rick, if you were talking to a skeptic today who says, I'm hearing about this God business, but I'm really not sure, and you only had like 2 minutes to talk this guy, what would you say?
First I would just point them to what's driving the question for you, because there's something driving that question. When a bucket gets full, you don't have to kick it very hard for stuff to spill out of it. So your bucket's full on this issue. How come? Why? What's driving that? Has there been you got some problem? Is there some issue, some loss? You got some big deal question that you've been wrestling with, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do with your life. Something's driving it. So what is that? There's a reason behind that. And I tend to do less talking and more listening. I think, I've found that sometimes as Christians, we want to be the shall answer man. and we give a lot of answers that people aren't necessarily looking for. But maybe if we're listening to what's driving it, what I do know is people want to have spiritual conversations today.
Yeah.
We're in a time when we're told to shut all that down, right? Keep it private. If we want to do this little thing on Google Plus and someone wants to watch it on YouTube, that's great. But man, don't take that out anywhere. I love what the great American philosopher Forrest Gump said. He said, when you go to the zoo, always take some food to feed the animals, even though the signs on the bar say don't feed the animals. It wasn't the animals that put those signs up.
Right.
What I'm discovering is people aren't interested in church today. We've got that uphill battle. They're not interested in the organized thing at all. They're not really even particularly interested in Christianity. They are, however, remarkably interested in Jesus. And they're interested in what he did and why he did what he did. And so for me today, there was a day when I would point people to evidentiary stuff about creation and how come the world's so complex and so delicately balanced and how this all happened. And now I really point people to, hey, let's look at what Jesus did and who he was and what he was about, and what he had to say and how did he live and how did he treat people.
Right.
What about any of that? Is there any of that might be appealing to you? Which then engages you backwards into those other conversations.
And it's fascinating to me because I've been in the church my whole life, and I'm coming up, I'm 48, coming up on my 50th birthday, and
You're old, man.
I still come across things that Jesus did and said that I'm like, wow, and I should know at this point, and I still run into things he said and did that I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think people, Stephen Covey has a line: people don't care what you know until they know you care, and
right.
And I do think that's why we have to get better at these two things Jesus said mattered most.
Right.
What does it really mean to connect with our neighbor? Do we even know who our neighbors are? Do we know anything about you? I used to work hard at trying to be interesting, and I'm trying to work harder at being interested. And big difference in those two things.
Sure.
Now, Rick, if someone either tonight or they catch the webcast a couple of weeks from now and they want to get a hold of you, they want to help out with the project or they have a question, how might they get in touch with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is just connect through the church, lbcc.org, put my name on the front of it, and you'll catch me. So.
Okay. Well, we're going to shut down. We're going to finish another season of Sunday Night Discussions. We'll be back with you how and where we're going to go with this in the future. But you have the honor, Rick, to be the last guy to pray for us.
Awesome.
Would you do that? Would you pray for our audience tonight?
Absolutely. Love to. Father, you know already what's going on in our hearts and our lives. You know the things that are going good for us. You know the things we're challenged by. Father, you know the things we're leaning into and the things we're leaning away from. And Lord, we just want to invite you into the middle of those things. We don't know the path forward. You do. We don't have the answers. You do. We don't, Father, know what the outcomes are going to be, but you do. And we just want to lean on you and trust you in that. Thanks for these guys and their hearts. Thanks for the privilege and opportunity to chat tonight about how you're at work in our lives. We're thankful for that. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.